Hello YouTube, and welcome to part 2 of my XSR700 strip down and rebuild. As I covered in my last video, I've removed all the external panels, the fuel tank, the seat and all of that. The next step, according to the Haynes manual, is to remove the throttle bodies, which are just above the engine, and the air filter housing. This is proving already a little tricky, as it's quite interesting on this manual, every bullet point, which looks quite simple, it then refers you to another chapter, which then has about 3 pages, and half of that refers you to other chapters as well. So I'm considering whether to start ignoring the manual and just start taking apart in a different sequence. But anyway, I'll stick with the procedure for now. Let's crack on. So the throttle bodies on this engine, as with every engine, on the intake side of the engine behind the throttle cable here, and you've got the airbox, which I need to remove as well. It's getting a bit tricky because it's quite constrained. A lot of the manual recommends you undo stuff going in through the top, but as you can see, there's a lot of sensors and cables and stuff all in the way. But I've made a start. I've loosened the airbox and pulled it back off the throttle bodies, and now I'm going to try and get deeper into it, get those parts removed. Okay, this step says to remove the hose from the airbox to the intake side, removing both ends. I've managed to remove the airbox end, but it says just simply use some pliers on the other end. There's no way I can get pliers in there, so I'm going to try and do that later on. And the next step is the fuel feeder hose from the fuel tank to the fuel rail. These are fairly easy. You just slide these covers back and then squeeze down on the 2 tabs and pull. So this is the fuel tank end, and this is the fuel rail end. That's the end of the fuel rail there. I've done both sides, and I'm just going to pull that out now. And with that hose removed, you get a better view of the fuel rail here, the throttle bodies there, and the whole area on the intake side. The next step is to remove the wiring connectors on top of the fuel injectors, which you can see the grey plugs here and one at the back there. These should just squeeze in and pull off as before. And with those connectors removed, the next step is to loosen off the airbox, pull it back out of the way as much as you can. Remove the 2 bolts from the top of the fuel rail there, and then pull the fuel rail off, taking care to keep the 2 washers underneath those bolts somewhere safe. And there you have it, a freshly removed XSR700 fuel rail, electrical connections, and there's the injectors. You can see, if I can focus, the very fine holes where it injects the fuel. That wasn't too hard. One thing I am wondering though is a lot of this is quite fiddly, reaching around all the pipes and frame and everything, and I don't really see at this stage why it couldn't be done once the engine's all been lowered out of the way. Might be much easier, but there might be a reason it's being done in this fashion. Back to removing the throttle bodies again then, and the first step is 2 connectors, the idle speed sensor, which is down between the just there, you can just see that black thing there, and the throttle position sensor, which is on the right hand side and is just that one there. So I'll unplug those. Just a quick tip, because a lot of these connectors aren't as easy to remove as they first look. I've managed to get this one off after a bit of fiddling around. It's got a tab on it that you push in, and you need to push it in quite hard, and it needs to make a proper click before you can pull the connector off. I couldn't really get the strength of my fingers to do this, so I used a thin screwdriver just to push hard on the edge of the tab, and then it pulled off pretty easily. And the idle speed sensor, which is buried down here, it looks like it's a similar sort of design. It looks like you push down on the top there and then it moves, and hopefully should slide off. Hopefully that'll help you out a bit. And after you've removed those 2, it's the ECT connector, which is underneath the throttle bodies, just there. Now, unless you're some sort of keyhole surgeon, this might be where it helps to read ahead a bit and see if you can help yourself out by removing stuff in a different sequence. I can't get my fingers around this sensor. It's deep in the engine, it's buried by everything. But I've looked ahead and it said the next few steps is to remove this EVAP canister by taking the hoses off either side and sliding it out. So I think once I've done that, I should be able to get to that sensor a lot more easily. Pulling out the EVAP canister now and just noting the connections. This one goes to the throttle bodies, this one goes I think to the fuel tank, and that routes up inside, comes around here, underneath this bar frame, pops up there. EVAP canister's now out. To get this, you can't just pull it out like the manual says. You have to pull it quite firmly and twist it at the same time and almost unscrew it and wiggle it out. Then it does come out, and then you've got a bit more space under the throttle bodies there. Now to remove the throttle cables. As you can see, you have a front throttle cable and a rear throttle cable and associated positions on the handlebars. You need to know which one is which. On mine, the smaller one seems to be the front one. So to do it, you loosen the upper nuts until you can lower it down enough to loosen the lower nuts, and then you can remove the cables. Right, nearly there now. So after removing another hose for the intake air pressure sensor, which just pulled up, yanking this airbox, which I loosened in my earlier video, back as far as possible, using some hex keys to wind off the circlips holding the throttle bodies on, and then just using both hands, pull in both throttle bodies off, trying to twist them this way as well so that they pop out of the engine and the airbox mounts. They're now all quite loose, and according to the manual they should just slide out to the left. And there we have it, one set of removed XSR700 throttle bodies. That's quite a wiggle to get them out, but I'd managed it in the end, so I'll probably give them a nice clean before I reinstall them on the new engine. That's all I'm going to do for today. It didn't take too long, probably about 2 hours in total. It was a bit less rewarding than the first half because you're not seeing quite so much visible progress, but I've got quite a lot of space in the engine area now. I still think some of this might be easier as you lower the engine because you would get more space. You'd have to be careful with cable slack and pipe routing and stuff, but I do wonder if that's a better way of doing it. I'm going to stick with the manual process for now. Thanks for watching, hope this has been useful, see you next time.